6 galactic cycles had passed since the humans left Council space. Ambassador Zethryx of the Vareni Collective stood alone in the observation deck of Station Meradia, watching empty shipping lanes stretch into the darkness. Once, these routes had been filled with human freighters, their crews laughing over radio channels, trading jokes with alien dock workers, carrying goods and stories from one end of the galaxy to the other. Now, there was only silence. Zethryx pressed her forefingered hand against the cold glass and remembered the day the Council had voted. 97 species had gathered in the Grand Chamber. 93 had voted yes. Yes to expulsion. Yes to removing humanity from civilized space. Yes to ending what they called the human problem. Chancellor Torvax of the Sindari Empire had given a speech that day. He had called humans chaotic and dangerous. He had called them emotional and unpredictable. He had said that the galaxy would be safer, cleaner, more orderly without them. The chamber had erupted in applause. Delegates who had spent centuries arguing with each other had finally found something they could agree on. The humans had to go. Zethryx had been one of the 4 who voted no. She remembered the look on the human ambassador's face when the results were announced. He had not shouted. He had not threatened. He had simply nodded, gathered his documents, and walked out of the chamber with quiet dignity. His name was Daniel Morrison, and he had spent 15 years building bridges between species who had hated each other for millennia. None of that had mattered in the end. The humans had packed their belongings within 30 days. They had honored every contract, completed every obligation, and transferred every piece of shared technology to their alien partners. They had done everything correctly, everything legally, everything with the same stubborn professionalism that had always confused other species. And then they had gone. Zethryx turned away from the window as her communicator chirped. The voice on the other end belonged to Station Commander Vareth, and it carried a tone she had learned to dread over the past 6 cycles. Ambassador, we have another situation. What is it this time? The medical shipment from Korath Prime? It never arrived. The transport company says they found a more profitable route. Zethryx closed her eyes. Before the humans left, the medical supply chains had run like clockwork. Human captains had understood that some cargo mattered more than profit. They had rerouted shipments through war zones, donated fuel to stranded vessels, and worked overtime to ensure that medicine reached dying colonies. The Korath captains who replaced them understood only numbers. How bad is it? She asked. The colony on Varys IV will run out of synth plasma in 3 days. Without it, the children in the burn ward will die. Contact the Council Emergency Services. I didn't, Ambassador. They said Varys IV is not a priority. The forms will take 2 weeks to process. Zethryx felt something cold settle in her chest. She remembered Captain Katie Brennan, a young human woman who had once flown her cargo ship through an asteroid field to deliver medicine to a Varani colony. When asked why she had risked her life, Brennan had laughed and said that paperwork was for people who had time to wait. The humans had never waited. They had simply acted. I will make some calls, Zethryx said quietly. Perhaps I can find a private vessel willing to help. Gas shitter, there is something else. Tell me. The Drevashi. They attacked the mining station on Kepler 7 this morning. 43 workers taken hostage. The station is destroyed. Zethryx gripped the edge of her console. The Drevashi were raiders, predators who had terrorized the outer colonies for centuries. They had been quiet for the past 50 years, ever since a human battle group had tracked them to their home system and delivered a lesson. They would not forget. But the humans were gone now. And predators had long memories. What is the Council response? She asked. The Council fleet is still reorganizing. They estimate a response force can be assembled in 6 weeks. 6 weeks? Those hostages will be dead in 6 days. I know, Ambassador. But the human tactical advisors who trained our officers left with the evacuation. Our commanders are struggling to coordinate basic operations. Zethryx ended the call and stood in silence. Through the observation window, she could see a Korath freighter drifting past, its hull covered in fresh paint and corporate logos. The company had bought the ship from a human family who had operated it for 3 generations. They had paid 10% of its actual value because the humans had no choice but to sell. The galaxy had wanted the humans gone. Now it was learning what that meant. She thought about the Grand Chamber, about the applause and the celebration, about Chancellor Torvax raising his arms in triumph. She thought about the human ambassador walking out alone, his footsteps echoing in the sudden silence. She thought about all the things the humans had done that no one had noticed. The emergency repairs on failing stations. The volunteers who taught alien children in underfunded schools. The doctors who worked double shifts in overcrowded hospitals. The soldiers who stood guard on distant borders so that others could sleep safely. No one had thanked them. No one had even acknowledged what they did. The galaxy had simply accepted their help as if it were owed. As if humans existed only to serve species who considered themselves superior. And now those species were learning to live. Without servants, Zhoutrix pulled up a star map on her console. Human space was marked in gray, a vast region that the Council had declared off-limits. No trade, no communication, no contact of any kind. The humans had accepted these terms without complaint. They had simply built a wall around themselves and stopped caring about what happened on the other side. She zoomed in on a small system near the border. Kepler 743 hostages waiting for a rescue that would come too late. Families who would never see their loved ones again. Children who would grow up without parents. The Drevashi had chosen their target carefully. They knew the Council could not respond quickly. They knew that the humans would not respond at all. They knew that the galaxy was weak. Zethryx thought about sending a message to human space. She thought about begging for help, explaining the situation, appealing to the compassion that humans had always shown so freely. But she knew what the answer would be. The humans had offered their friendship for 200 years, and the galaxy had spit in their faces. They would not be foolish enough to offer it again. She turned off the star map and walked to the window. Outside, the empty shipping lanes stretched into infinity. Somewhere beyond them, the humans were building new lives, new communities, new futures that did not include the species who had rejected them, and somewhere in the darkness, the Drevashi were celebrating their victory, planning their next attack. Remembering what the galaxy had been like before humanity arrived, Zethryx stood alone and watched the stars. For the first time in her long life, she felt afraid. Counselor Threx of the Mendari Consortium walked through the empty corridors of Research Station. Nexus Prime. His footsteps echoed against metal walls that had once hummed with activity. Now the only sound was the gentle hiss of life. Support systems keeping the abandoned facility alive for no one. He had been one of the loudest voices calling for human expulsion. His species prided themselves on logic, on careful thought, on the absence of messy emotions. Humans were the opposite of everything the Mendari valued. They made decisions based on feelings. They took risks that made no mathematical sense. They laughed and cried and loved with an intensity that Threx had found deeply uncomfortable. So he had voted yes. He had given speeches about the danger of human unpredictability. He had written papers explaining why the galaxy would function better without their chaos. Now, he walked through a building full of answers that would never be found. The xenobiology wing had been led by a human scientist named Samuel Price. Threx had met him once. At a conference on Mendari Prime, Price had been short and balding, with glasses that kept sliding down his nose and a laugh that filled every room he entered. He had spent 20 years studying diseases that affected alien species, searching for cures that would save millions of lives. His office was exactly as he had left it. Datapads scattered across the desk. Coffee mug sitting beside the terminal, still stained brown from his last drink. Photographs on the wall showing Price with colleagues from a dozen different species, all of them smiling, all of them happy. Threx sat down in the empty chair and activated the terminal. Price's research files appeared on screen, thousands of documents representing a lifetime of work. Most of it was too advanced for Threx to understand. But one folder caught his attention. Vendari Wasting Syndrome. The disease had plagued the Vendari species for over 1,000 years. It attacked the nervous system slowly, painfully, inevitably. 1 in every 100 Vendari children was born with it. There was no cure. There had never been hope until Samuel Price decided to look for one. Threx opened the files and read through them carefully. Price had approached the problem differently than Vendari scientists. He had not focused on the disease itself. Instead, he had studied how human immune systems fought similar conditions, then adapted those strategies for Vendari biology. The results were remarkable. Threx was not a scientist, but even he could see that Price had been close. Very close. His final notes indicated that a working cure was perhaps 3 months away. 3 months. And then the council had voted, and the humans had left. And Samuel Price had packed his photographs and walked away from 20 years of work. Threx found the last entry in Price's personal log. He hesitated before opening it, feeling like an intruder reading someone else's private thoughts. But he needed to understand. He needed to know what the humans had felt when the galaxy turned against them. The entry was dated the day before departure. Personal log. The council voted today. I suppose we always knew it would come to this. They never wanted us here. They wanted what we could do for them, but they never wanted us. Commander Morrison says we should be angry, but I am not angry. I am tired. We came to the stars hoping to find friends, and instead we found customers who hated paying the bill. Perhaps some distances cannot be crossed. Perhaps some species need to learn the hard way what they have lost. I wish them well. They will not wish us the same. Threx read the entry 3 times. Each time he felt something strange building in his chest. His species had no word for it. The Mendari did not believe in emotions, did not acknowledge them, did not allow them to influence their perfectly logical lives. But sitting in Samuel Price's empty office, surrounded by research that would have saved millions of lives, Threx felt something that logic could not explain. He felt ashamed. A notification appeared on his console. The Vendari delegation had arrived at the station, requesting an urgent meeting. Threx knew why they had come. Word had spread that Price's research still existed in the abandoned facility. The Vendari were desperate, hoping that someone could complete what the human scientists had started. Threx walked to the conference room and found 3 Vendari diplomats waiting. Their leader was an older female named Sareth, her scales already showing the gray discoloration that marked the early stages of wasting syndrome. She had perhaps 5 years left to live. Counselor Threx, she said, her voice steady despite her condition. We have come to discuss the research of Dr. Price. We understand that his work on our disease remains in this facility. Does, Threx replied. I have reviewed his files. And can your scientists complete his work? Threx hesitated. He thought about the elegant simplicity of Price's approach, the creative leaps that no Mendari researcher would have made, the intuitive understanding of biology that seemed to come naturally to humans. Oh, he said finally. We cannot. Sarath's composure cracked for just a moment. There must be someone. The Karath have excellent medical facilities. The Sindari have resources beyond measure. Surely one of the great powers can finish what Dr. Price started. The Korath have reviewed the files. They say the methodology is too unconventional. The Sindari have no interest in diseases that do not affect their own species. Threx paused. I am sorry, Ambassador. The only scientist who could have completed this work is gone. We sent him away. Then contact him. Offer him whatever he wants. Money, resources, a private laboratory. The Vendari will pay any price. Ambassador, the humans have closed their borders. They do not answer our communications. Even if we could reach Dr. Price, why would he help us? We rejected his people. We called them inferior. We celebrated when they left. Sareth stared at him with eyes that had seen too much suffering. Because he spent 20 years trying to save our children. Because he worked nights and weekends without extra pay. Because when my niece was diagnosed with the syndrome, Dr. Price sat with her for 3 hours and explained what was happening in words a child could understand. He held her hand while she cried. He promised her that he would find a cure. Her voice broke. He promised her, Counselor, and we took him away from her. Threx had no answer. He stood in the empty conference room, surrounded by abandoned equipment and broken promises, felt the weight of what his species had done. The Vendari delegation left that evening. Threx watched their ship depart through the observation window, carrying 3 diplomats back to a homeworld where children were still being born with a disease that should have been cured. He thought about Samuel Price's last log entry. "We came to the stars hoping to find friends." The words echoed in his mind, mixing with the memory of Sarath's broken voice and the image of a little girl crying while a human. Scientist held her hand. The Mindari believed in logic. They believed that every problem had a rational solution, that every question had a mathematical answer, that emotions were weaknesses to be overcome, but logic could not. Explain why Threx stood alone in the empty station and wept for the first time in his life. The Dravashi warfleet appeared at the edge of Sindari space without warning. Admiral Korath stood on the bridge of his flagship, the Imperial Sword, watching 40 enemy vessels emerge from faster-than-light travel. Each ship bristled with weapons that should have been impossible for a species the Council had dismissed as primitive raiders. "Battle stations," he commanded, his voice calm despite the fear growing in his chest. All ships formed defensive pattern 7. His officers scrambled to obey, but Korath could see the confusion in their movements. They had trained for this scenario 100 times in simulations. But simulations did not capture the terror of watching real enemy ships power up real weapon systems. The Dravashi had been quiet for 50 years. Korath had been a young officer when the last major raid occurred, watching from a communications post as human battleships tore through the enemy fleet. Commander Katie Brennan had led that engagement. She had been barely 30 years old, commanding a force half the size of what she faced. And she had won so decisively that the Dravashi had retreated to their home systems and stayed there. Brennan had retired 10 years ago. Korath had attended the ceremony, listening as she warned the assembled officers that peace was not permanent. "The Dravashi are predators," she had said. "They do not forget. They do not forgive. They simply wait." No one had listened. The humans were leaving, and everyone was too busy celebrating to worry about old enemies. "Admiral, the enemy commander is requesting communication. Put him through." The view screen flickered to life, revealing a Dravashi face that Korath recognized from intelligence reports. Warlord Kethis, leader of the largest raider clan, survivor of a dozen battles against human forces. His scales were scarred, his eyes were cold, and his smile showed far too many teeth. "Admiral Korath," Kethis said, his voice smooth and mocking. "How kind of you to greet us personally. We were worried that the mighty Sindari had forgotten how to fight. You are in violation of the Nexus Accords. Withdraw your forces immediately, or face destruction." Kethis laughed, a harsh sound that echoed across the bridge. "The Nexus Accords were enforced by humans. Admiral Lu, the humans are gone. Your paper agreements mean nothing without the strength to back them up. The Sindari fleet is 3 times your size. We have the strength. Do you?" Kethis leaned forward, his eyes gleaming with ancient hunger. "Your ships are impressive, Admiral. Your weapons are powerful. But your crews are soft. They have grown comfortable behind human shields, fighting simulated battles against imaginary enemies. My warriors have spent 50 years remembering what we lost. We have trained our children to hate. We have built our ships with revenge as fuel." Allah. He spread his arms wide. "You have numbers. We have purpose. Let us see which matters more." The channel closed. Korath stared at the empty screen for a long moment, then turned to his tactical officer. "Status of the enemy fleet? They are advancing in attack formation, Admiral. All weapons charged. Estimated engagement in 4 minutes." Korath thought about Commander Brennan's retirement speech. He thought about the human tactical advisors who had trained Sindari officers for decades, teaching them strategies that had won 100 battles. Those advisors had left with the evacuation. Their knowledge had gone with them. All ships, prepare to engage. The battle began with a Dravashi missile barrage that lit up the darkness like a second sun. Korath's ships returned fire, their weapons striking enemy hulls, their shields absorbing incoming rounds. For a few minutes, it seemed like the Sindari numbers would prevail. Then the Dravashi changed tactics. They split their fleet into small groups, each one targeting a different section of the Sindari formation. Instead of fighting head-on, they struck from multiple angles, forcing Korath's ships to divide their attention. It was a strategy that human commanders had used against the Dravashi 50 years ago. The raiders had learned from their defeats. Admiral, we are losing formation cohesion. The enemy is exploiting gaps in our defensive line. Order all ships to tighten formation. Concentrate fire on the lead enemy vessels. Our captains are not responding to coordinate commands. They are engaging targets individually. Korath watched his carefully planned strategy fall apart. His officers knew the textbook maneuvers, but they did not know how to adapt when the enemy refused to follow the script. Human commanders had always emphasized flexibility, creativity, the willingness to abandon plans that were not working. The Sindari had dismissed these lessons as emotional thinking. The battle lasted for hours. By the end, 18 Sindari vessels had been destroyed or disabled. The Dravashi had lost only 2 ships. When Kethis finally ordered his fleet to withdraw, they took with them 3 colony transports full of hostages and enough stolen resources to fund another decade of expansion. Korath stood on his damaged bridge, surrounded by wounded officers and broken equipment. Through the cracked view screen, he could see debris drifting through space, the remains of ships that had been whole just hours before. His communications officer approached hesitantly. Admiral, the Council is demanding a report. They want to know how this happened. How this happened. Korath's voice was hollow. This happened because we forgot what war costs. We forgot that peace must be defended. We forgot that our enemies were watching us, waiting for the moment we became weak. He turned away from the view screen. We forgot that the humans were not just our allies. They were our teachers, and we expelled them before the lesson was finished. The Council's response arrived 3 days later. Chancellor Torvax expressed regret for the losses, but emphasized that the situation was under control. Additional ships would be deployed to the border. New defensive measures would be implemented. The Sindari Empire remained strong. Korath read the message and felt nothing but exhaustion. The Chancellor was a politician who had never commanded a ship, never watched friends die in the vacuum of space, never faced an enemy who wanted to destroy everything he loved. He thought about Katie Brennan. Retired now in human space, probably living quietly on some peaceful colony world. He wondered if she had heard about the battle. He wondered if she felt any satisfaction knowing that her warnings had come true. He wondered if the humans were watching from behind their closed borders, watching the galaxy learn the lessons they had tried to teach for 200 years. The next Dravashi attack came 6 weeks later. This time, they targeted a civilian station. 12,000 dead in a single day. And somewhere in the darkness, Warlord Kethis smiled and planned his next conquest. Knowing that no one was left to stop him, the emergency session of the Galactic Council was the largest gathering in 300 years. Representatives from 97 species filled the grand chamber, sitting in seats that had been designed for celebration but now felt like prison cells. The air was thick with fear. No one was celebrating. Chancellor Torvax of the Sindari Empire stood at the central podium, his face gray with exhaustion. The past 6 cycles had aged him 20 years. His proud posture had become a tired slouch. His confident voice had become a hesitant whisper. "We face a crisis unlike any in our history," he began. "The Dravashi incursions continue. 14 colony worlds have been raided. 38,000 citizens are dead or missing. Our military has suffered defeat after defeat against an enemy we once considered beneath our concern." He paused to consult his notes. Though everyone in the chamber already knew what he would say, the Kathrani swarm has emerged from hibernation early. Their scouts have been spotted in the outer territories. Our analysts believe they are testing our defenses, searching for weakness. Without intervention, they will launch a full invasion within 2 years. A murmur of fear rippled through the chamber. The Kathrani were ancient, patient, relentless. They had nearly conquered the galaxy once, stopped only by a coalition of species who had put aside their differences to fight together. That coalition had been led by human admirals who understood that survival required sacrifice. Those admirals were gone now. The economic situation is equally dire, Torvax continued. Trade routes that once carried goods across the galaxy are now empty or controlled by pirates. Supply chains have collapsed. Medical shortages have reached critical levels in 17 sectors. Food production has declined by 30%. He set down his notes and looked out at the assembled representatives. "We are failing," he said simply. "We are failing, and I do not know how to stop it." The chamber erupted in shouting. Delegates accused each other of incompetence, cowardice, betrayal. Old rivalries that had been buried for generations suddenly surfaced again, fueled by fear and desperation. Ambassador Zethrix of the Varani Collective stood and waited for silence. It took several minutes, but eventually the chamber quieted. Everyone knew that Zethrix had voted against human expulsion. Everyone knew that she had been right. "Perhaps we should discuss why this is happening," she said, her voice calm and clear. "The reasons are irrelevant," Torvax replied. "We must focus on solutions. The reasons are the only thing that matters." Zethrix stepped forward, her eyes moving across the assembled delegates. "We drove away the humans because we resented them. We called them chaotic and dangerous. We said they were emotional and unpredictable. We convinced ourselves that the galaxy would be better without them." She paused, letting her words sink in. "We forgot that their chaos was also adaptability. When crises struck, humans did not wait for committees to approve action plans. They simply acted. They improvised. They found solutions that no other species would have considered because no other species thought the way they did." Counselor Threx of the Mendari Consortium rose to support her. His presence surprised many delegates. The Mendari had been among the strongest voices calling for human expulsion. "I have spent 6 cycles reviewing human contributions to our civilization," Threx said. "What I found has changed everything I believed about them." He activated a display showing thousands of records and documents. "Humans gave us faster medical research. They approached diseases differently than we did, using intuition and creativity alongside logic. Dr. Samuel Price was 3 months from curing Vendari wasting syndrome when we expelled him. That cure died with his departure. Millions of Vendari children will die because we could not tolerate his species." The Vendari delegation sat in stunned silence. Many of them had children with the syndrome. Many of them had hoped that someone would find a cure. "Humans gave us improved engineering solutions," Threx continued. "They built bridges between systems that had never communicated, created trade networks that benefited species who had been enemies for centuries. They did not ask for gratitude. They did not demand payment. They simply saw problems and tried to fix them." A Korath delegate stood, his face twisted with anger. They were inferior, short-lived, fragile, irrational. They had no business interfering in the affairs of ancient species. Zethrix turned to face him. "They were bridge builders," she said quietly. "When the Varani and the Mendari disputed territory, it was a human diplomat named Lisa Carter who found a compromise both sides could accept. She spent 2 years learning our languages, understanding our cultures, searching for common ground that neither species could see. Without her, we would have gone to war. When the Kathrani swarm threatened our borders 20 years ago, it was a human admiral named Christopher Grant who led the defense fleet. He commanded ships from 16 different species, coordinating forces that had never worked together, holding the line while our politicians argued about jurisdiction." Zethrix's voice grew stronger. "We were not protecting them. They were protecting us." The chamber fell silent. For the first time, delegates looked at each other with something other than blame. They looked at each other with recognition. "Then what do we do?" Torvax asked finally. "The humans are gone. They will not return. We cannot undo what we did." Zethrix looked around at the gathered representatives. 100 species, all of them powerful, ancient, proud. 100 species who had spent centuries building civilizations that now crumbled without the support they had refused to acknowledge. "We learned to live with what we have lost," she said. We stop blaming each other and start working together. We remember the lessons the humans tried to teach us, even if we can no longer learn from them directly. She walked to the center of the chamber, standing where human ambassadors had once stood. And we hope, she said softly, that someday we will have the chance to apologize. The session continued for 3 more days. Agreements were reached, alliances were formed, resources were allocated. For the first time in centuries, the species of the Galactic Council worked together without human mediation. But everyone knew it was not enough. Everyone knew that they were building with broken tools, fighting with half-trained soldiers, solving problems with solutions that humans would have improved 100 times over. Everyone knew that they had thrown away something precious, and no amount of cooperation could bring it back. On the last day of the session, Zethryx returned to the observation deck of Station Meridia. She stood at the same window where she had watched the shipping lanes fall silent, where she had first understood what the galaxy had lost. This time, she was not alone. Counselor Threx stood beside her, his logical mind finally accepting what his heart had known for cycles. "Do you think they will ever forgive us?" he asked. Zethryx watched the stars and thought about Daniel Morrison, Katie Brennan, Samuel Price, Lisa Carter, Christopher Grant. She thought about all the humans who had given everything to a galaxy that had given nothing in return. "Forgiveness requires hope," she said. "And I do not know if we deserve to hope." Together, they stood in silence, watching the empty darkness where human ships had once sailed, deep in human space. Beyond the borders that the Council could no longer cross, Commander Daniel Morrison sat in the captain's quarters of the starship Horizon's Edge. The room was small and simple, decorated only with a few photographs from his years as an ambassador. He had not looked at those photographs in a long time. The message on his screen had arrived that morning, routed through a dozen relay stations before reaching human territory. It carried the official seal of the Galactic Council. It's a first formal communication since the expulsion vote 6 cycles ago. Morrison read it 3 times, his face showing no emotion. Then he called his senior staff to the bridge. Lieutenant Amanda Drake arrived first, followed by Chief Engineer Marcus Webb and Medical Officer Dr. Patricia Lane. They were good people, loyal officers who had served with Morrison for years. They had all lost something when the Council turned against humanity. "We have received a formal request from the Galactic Council," Morrison announced, projecting the message onto the main view screen. "They are asking for humanitarian aid, medical supplies, technical advisors, peacekeeping forces." Drake laughed, but there was no humor in the sound. "After everything they said? After they called us animals and barbarians? After they celebrated in the streets when we left? After they voted to expel us from civilized space?" Webb added, his voice bitter. "I had a house on Nexus Prime. My children went to school there. My wife had friends she had known for 20 years. They took all of that away because they decided we did not belong." Morrison nodded slowly. "After all of that, yes. What does Command say?" Drake asked. "Command says the decision is ours. We were the ones they rejected. We were the ones they hurt. Command believes we should have a voice in how we respond." Dr. Lane stepped forward, her expression troubled. "Commander, I have been monitoring the news from Council space. The situation is bad. Medical facilities are failing. Diseases we could have cured are spreading unchecked. Children are dying because no one knows how to treat conditions that human doctors handled every day. That is not our responsibility," Webb said firmly. "They made it very clear that they did not want our help. They made it clear that they did not want us," Lane replied. "There is a difference. The politicians voted for expulsion. The ordinary people, the workers and families and children, they had no say. They are the ones suffering now." Morrison listened to his officers argue, watching their faces as they struggled with conflicting emotions: anger and compassion, resentment and duty, the desire to let the Council face the consequences of its choices, and the instinct to help those in need, regardless of how they had been treated. It was a very human conflict. 6 cycles ago, Morrison said quietly, Ambassador Zethryx came to me after the vote. She was one of the 4 who voted against expulsion. She apologized for what her colleagues had done. She said she was ashamed of her people. He turned to face the view screen, watching the stars drift past. I told her that shame was not enough. I told her that the council had shown us who they really were, and we would remember. I told her that humanity would survive without them, and perhaps they would learn to survive without us. And now? Drake asked. Now I wonder if I was right. Morrison turned back to his crew. The Dravashi have returned. They are raiding colonies, taking hostages, killing civilians. The Kathrani swarm is preparing to invade. The supply chains have collapsed. The medical systems are failing. Everything we built over 200 years is falling apart because they destroyed it, Webb said. Because they drove us away. Yes. And because of that, innocent people are dying. Morrison walked to the tactical console and pulled up a map of council space. Look at this. These red markers are refugee camps. These blue ones are medical emergencies. These yellow ones are active combat zones. The map was covered in markers. There was barely any empty space left. The council did this to themselves, Morrison continued. They made choices, and now they face consequences. That is fair. That is just. But the children in those refugee camps did not make any choices. The patients in those hospitals did not vote for expulsion. The families hiding from Dravashi raiders did not celebrate when we left. He looked at each of his officers in turn. We did not help the galaxy because they deserved it. We helped because that is what humans do. We saw problems and tried to fix them. We saw suffering and tried to ease it. We built bridges because we believed that connection was better than isolation, that cooperation was better than conflict, that compassion was better than revenge. And they threw it all back in our faces, Drake said. But her voice was softer now. Yes, they did. Morrison smiled sadly. But their choices do not change who we are. Their rejection does not transform us into something we are not. We can let their hatred make us hateful, or we can remember that we are better than that. The bridge was silent for a long moment. Then Dr. Lane spoke. Commander, I became a doctor because I wanted to help people. All people. I have been treating only human patients for 6 cycles, and I have missed working with other species. Their biology was fascinating. Their gratitude was genuine. Most of them never understood why we were helping them, but they appreciated it anyway. I had friends among the Varani, Webb admitted reluctantly. Engineers who worked with me on station maintenance. They were not politicians. They were just people trying to do their jobs. I wonder if they are still alive. Drake sighed heavily. The Sindari cadets I trained were good kids. Scared and inexperienced, but willing to learn. I heard that most of them died in the Dravashi attacks. She shook her head. They did not deserve that. No one deserves that. Morrison waited, letting his crew work through their feelings at their own pace. Finally, Drake looked up and met his eyes. What do you want us to do, Commander? Morrison smiled, the first real smile he had managed in 6 cycles. I want us to be human. I want us to help people who need help, regardless of how they treated us. I want us to show the galaxy that rejection does not destroy compassion, that cruelty does not create cruelty, that we are exactly who we always claimed to be. He turned to the helm console and began entering coordinates. Prepare the relief convoy. We are going back. The horizon's edge turned toward Council space, leading a fleet of supply ships into the darkness. Behind them, more vessels followed, carrying medicine and food and engineers and soldiers. Word had spread quickly through human space, and volunteers had appeared from every colony, every station. Every world where humans had built new lives. They did not go because the Council deserved forgiveness. They did not go because they had forgotten the pain of expulsion. They went because helping was simply who they were. And no amount of rejection could change that fundamental truth. Somewhere ahead, Ambassador Zethric stood at her observation window and watched a fleet of human ships emerge from faster-than-light travel. She stared in disbelief as vessel after vessel appeared, more ships than she had ever seen. All of them heading toward Council space, her communicator chirped. The voice on the other end belonged to Daniel Morrison, Ambassador Zethric. We received your message. We are here to help. Zethric tried to speak, but words failed her. After everything her people had done, after all the hatred and rejection and cruelty, the humans had come back. not as conquerors, not as avengers. As healers, why? She managed finally. Why would you help us after everything we did? Morrison's answer was simple, because you needed us. And that has always been enough. The human fleet spread across council space, bringing aid to a galaxy that had tried to destroy them. And somewhere in the darkness, species who had celebrated humanity's departure now wept with relief as human ships appeared above their worlds, carrying the compassion they had rejected and could not live without. The council had learned what existence looked like without humans. Now, they would learn what it meant to be forgiven by them.